Hello, friend. There is a story tonight about a world before the world, long before the dinosaurs walked, before anything walked at all. The earth was already old, already strange, already full of giants. Some of them had no bones. Some of them had too many legs. Some of them we still don't fully understand, and they are, in their way, the ancestors of the quiet you feel right now. Now, close your eyes if you'd like, let your breathing slow, and let's begin. Before there were dinosaurs, before there was almost anything you would recognize as alive, the earth was a ball of rock and water spinning in a silence older than sound. For nearly 4 billion years, nothing that lived left a shadow, a footprint, or a shell. Life existed, but it was small and soft and single-celled, drifting in oceans with no eyes to see them and no ears to hear the waves. And yet, in that vast and patient darkness, something was already beginning. Something was learning to divide, to repeat, to become more than one thing. It took its time. It always takes its time. The oldest fossils we have found are called stromatolites, layered mounds built slowly by colonies of bacteria in shallow ancient seas. Each layer is a single day or a single season of a creature so small it cannot be seen without a microscope. And yet together, over centuries, they built structures the size of boulders. Some of these formations, in Western Australia, are more than 3 billion years old. They still exist today, in a few warm lagoons, doing the same slow work they have always done. Beneath that constancy is something worth holding on to tonight. That smallness, repeated patiently enough, becomes a monument. For most of Earth's history, life was invisible to the naked eye. We call this the Precambrian, a name that simply means before the Cambrian, before the world we can picture. It lasted for more than 4 billion years, nearly 7/8 of the planet's entire life. Continents formed and dissolved. Oceans froze over completely, more than once, in ice ages so severe scientists call them snowball Earth. And still, somewhere beneath the ice, something small kept dividing, kept trying, kept waiting for warmth. Even as you rest tonight, your body carries a quiet echo of that ancient patience. Every cell in you divides and repairs itself in the dark without needing your permission, without needing you to be awake. You are, in this very moment, doing exactly what the earliest living things did, quietly persisting, cell by cell, in the dark. Around 635 million years ago, the ice that had covered nearly the entire Earth began, slowly, to melt. Scientists call this the end of the cryogenian period, and what followed was warmer, wetter, and strangely gentle. It was into this thaw that some of the first complex, multicellular life began to appear. Not yet animals as we would recognize them, but soft-bodied, quiet forms drifting or resting on the seafloor. It is one of the strangest facts of the ancient world that life's first great flourishing followed one of its harshest winters. This period is called the Ediacaran, and its creatures are some of the most mysterious in Earth's history. Many looked like nothing alive today. Quilted discs, frond-like fronds, ribbed ovals resembling nothing so much as a leaf pressed flat in stone. We still don't fully know how many of them moved, or ate, or reproduced. Some may not have had mouths at all, absorbing nutrients directly from the water around them in a kind of endless, gentle breathing. One creature from this time, called Dickinsonia, looked like a ribbed oval bath mat, sometimes over a meter long, resting flat on ancient seafloors. For decades, scientists debated whether it was even an animal. Recent traces of cholesterol molecules, a fat found almost exclusively in animals, finally confirmed it. And yet we still don't know exactly how it fed or moved or what it felt, if it felt anything at all. It rested there, patiently, for 100 million years, asking nothing of the world but a quiet current. Another Ediacaran creature, Charnia, resembled a frond of seaweed but was most likely an animal. Colonial, branching, anchored to the seafloor like a fern made of jelly. It has no eyes in the fossil record because it needed none. It simply grew where the current fed it, absorbing what drifted by, asking nothing more from a world that had, for the first time, decided to grow strange and soft shapes instead of simple ones. And yet, almost all of these Ediacaran creatures vanished around 539 million years ago. In a shift geologists still debate the causes of, the fossil record changes almost overnight. Geologically speaking, hard shells appear, eyes appear, legs, gills, claws, and jaws appear, seemingly all at once, in a burst so sudden and so strange that it has its own name, the Cambrian explosion. It is one of the great unresolved mysteries of paleontology. Not why life became complex, but why it happened so quickly, in what amounts to a geological blink. Some of the strangest animals that have ever existed appeared in the Cambrian seas. Anomalocaris, whose name means abnormal shrimp, grew up to a meter long and swam with rippling side fins, seizing prey with two clawed, grasping arms in front of a mouth ringed with jagged plates. For its time, it was a giant, the largest predator in any ocean on Earth, ruling seas where most other creatures were the size of a fingernail. We still don't know exactly how it saw the world, though eyes on stalks nearby suggest it saw quite well. Even as you lie still tonight, somewhere in your own body is a design first tested in those ancient seas. The basic plan of a spine, a front and a back, a left and a right. These were Cambrian inventions, tried out in creatures with names like Pacaya, a small, wriggling, worm-like animal barely longer than your finger. It had no eyes, no jaws, nothing that looked impressive. But down its back ran a simple rod of stiffened tissue, an early notochord. The first sketch of what would, hundreds of millions of years later, become your own spine. Trilobites arrived during the same explosive burst of life and would go on to survive for nearly 300 million years, longer than the dinosaurs would later last by a wide margin. Some were the size of a grain of rice. Others, like Isotellus rex, grew longer than your forearm. They had compound eyes made of dozens or even hundreds of tiny lenses, allowing many of them to see nearly all the way around themselves at once. A defense against the strange new predators sharing their world. Beneath the surface of these Cambrian seas, something else was happening that had never happened before. An arms race. Predators evolved eyes. Prey evolved shells. Shells grew spines. Claws grew stronger. It was, in its way, the first great conversation between hunter and hunted. A conversation that has never really stopped, echoing forward through every predator and every hiding place that has existed since, including, in a very small way, the locked door and the warm blanket that keep you safe tonight. We still don't know precisely what triggered the Cambrian explosion. Some scientists point to a rise in oxygen. Others suggest the evolution of eyes themselves forced everything else to adapt or vanish. Others believe simple genetic switches, once turned on, allowed body plans to diversify at a pace never seen before or since. It seems like something we should know by now, and yet the deep past keeps some of its secrets close, folding them into stone and silence. As the Cambrian gave way to the Ordovician period, Roughly 485 million years ago, life did something it had never done before. It grew bigger, and it grew stranger, in the open water rather than only on the seafloor. Enormous nautiloids, distant, shelled cousins of today's squid, grew shells over 2 meters long, coiled or straight as spears, drifting through oceans that still had no fish with jaws, no coral reefs as we know them, and no life at all on land except perhaps a thin film of moss-like growth clinging to damp rock. One of these creatures, Camaraceras, may have grown a straight, tapering shell over 6 meters in length, longer than a small car, making it, for a time, the largest animal that had ever lived. It likely drifted just above the seafloor, using a muscular hood full of tentacles to seize smaller creatures below it, an ancient giant whose closest living relatives, the nautilus and the octopus, are now some of the gentlest creatures in the sea. And yet, size did not mean safety. Around 445 million years ago, a mass extinction. One of the 5 great die-offs in Earth's history, swept through the oceans, likely tied to a sudden global cooling, an ice age so severe it lowered sea levels and froze shallow seas around much of the ancient world. More than 80% of marine species vanished. The giants of the Ordovician mostly disappeared with it. Even the largest and most successful things, it seems, are not immune to a changing sky. Out of that cold and quiet aftermath came the Silurian period, and with it, one of the strangest groups of animals to ever patrol the shallow seas, the Eurypterids, often called sea scorpions, though they were not scorpions and did not always stay in the sea. Some grew over 2 meters long, longer than a tall man is high, with paddle-like limbs for swimming and, in some species, claws large enough to grip and crush shelled prey with a single motion. Pterygotus, one of the largest of these sea scorpions, had compound eyes set wide on its head and a pair of massive, serrated claws extending in front of its body like living shears. For nearly 100 million years, animals like this ruled shallow coastal waters, apex predators long before anything with a spine had crawled onto dry land to challenge them. It seems strange now to imagine a world where scorpions the length of a canoe were the fiercest thing alive. And yet, beneath the quiet lagoons of ancient Europe and North America, that world was entirely real. Even now, as you rest, tiny descendants of these ancient hunters exist in gardens and basements around the world. Spiders, scorpions, and horseshoe crabs, all distant cousins of the sea scorpions, all carrying forward in miniature a body plan first perfected in oceans 400 million years old. You have likely never feared a spider knowing this. Perhaps tonight, you can let that fear soften into something closer to wonder. It was also during the Silurian that the first plants began, tentatively, to leave the water altogether, small, simple, leafless. Little more than green stalks a few centimeters tall. These earliest land plants had no roots, no seeds, no flowers, only a fine dusting of spores released into air that had, for the first time in Earth's 4 billion year history, something small and green standing quietly within it. We still don't know exactly what it looked like. That first moment, a plant held itself upright without the buoyancy of water to support it. There was no camera, no witness, no fossil capturing the precise instant. There was only the quiet mathematics of geology, telling us that somewhere, in a damp and muddy margin between sea and stone, the color green first stood up. By the time the Devonian period began, around 419 million years ago, the land was no longer empty. Forests of primitive plants. Not yet trees as we would recognize them, but towering nonetheless, some reaching 10 meters high, cast the first true shadows the land had ever known. Beneath them, in rivers and shallow seas, fish were becoming something extraordinary. This period is often called the Age of Fishes, and it is easy to understand why. Dunkleosteus, one of the most fearsome predators of the Devonian seas, grew up to 6 meters long and had no teeth at all. Instead, 2 sets of sharp, bony plates lined its jaws, capable of shearing through the armor of other fish with a bite force among the strongest of any creature that has ever lived. It was a placoderm, an armored fish, one of the last and largest of a lineage that would soon vanish almost entirely, leaving barely a trace in the oceans that followed. And yet, beneath that armored violence, something gentler and more consequential was happening in shallower Devonian waters. Certain fish, living in warm, oxygen-poor swamps, began developing sturdier fins with internal bones resembling, in a rough and early way, the bones of an arm. These lobe-finned fish were not trying to leave the water. They were simply trying to survive in it, pushing themselves along muddy bottoms, breathing air at the surface when the water itself grew too thin to breathe. One of these fish, Tiktaalik, found in fossil form in the Canadian Arctic, had a flat head, a mobile neck, something fish do not usually have, and fins with wrist-like joints capable of bearing at least some of its weight. It was neither fully fish nor fully land animal, and it remains one of the most beautiful transitional fossils ever found, a creature caught, quite literally, between 2 worlds, in a way that manages to feel more like patience than uncertainty. You are made, in the quietest and most literal sense, of decisions made by fish like this. The bones in your own wrist, the very ones resting still beneath your blanket right now, echo the same basic architecture first tested in swamps nearly 375 million years ago. Even as you breathe tonight, easily, without thinking, you are using a solution first improvised by a fish gasping at the edge of a drying pool. Late in the Devonian, another mass extinction swept through, particularly devastating to life in the oceans, dimming reefs that would not fully recover their former richness for 100 million years. Scientists still debate its causes. Some point to volcanic activity, others to the spread of early forests themselves, whose roots may have altered rivers and stripped nutrients into the sea faster than ancient ecosystems could absorb. Even growth, it seems, can carry an unintended cost. Out of that extinction's aftermath rose the Carboniferous period, beginning around 359 million years ago. And it is here that the forgotten giants of this story truly begin to take their now familiar, unsettling shapes. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere rose to levels far higher than today, perhaps as much as 35% of the air, compared to just 21% now. And in that richer, more breathable world, certain creatures grew to sizes that would be impossible in the air you are breathing tonight. Meganeura, an ancient relative of the dragonfly, had a wingspan of over 70 centimeters, nearly the length of your arm from shoulder to fingertip. It hunted other insects and small vertebrates in the humid, swampy forests of the Carboniferous, gliding on wings veined like stained glass through air far richer in oxygen than the air around you now. Insects, which breathe through simple tubes rather than lungs, seem to have grown larger simply because there was, for a time, more air to breathe. Beneath those same swamp canopies crawled Arthropleura, the largest land invertebrate known to have ever existed. A many-legged, armored creature resembling a millipede, growing over 2 meters long, roughly the length of a small canoe. It likely ate fallen leaves and decaying plant matter, an enormous, gentle detritivore lumbering through primeval forests on dozens of legs, entirely harmless despite its size, a giant built not for violence but for patient, unglamorous decomposition. And still, even as these giant arthropods ruled the undergrowth, four-legged animals, tetrapods, the descendants of those ancient lobe-finned fish, were spreading across the swampy forest floor in forms both strange and startlingly large. Some resembled crocodiles. Others resembled nothing alive today at all, with wide, flattened heads and bodies built low and heavy, moving between pools of standing water and air that smelled, almost certainly, of rot, moisture, and endless green. Even as you sleep tonight, the coal seams mined beneath much of the modern world are, quite literally, the compressed remains of these very carboniferous forests. Hundreds of millions of years of fallen trees, pressed and heated and transformed into the black stone that, for over a century, powered much of human civilization. In a very real sense, the giants of this forgotten world have been warming human homes, one buried and burning memory at a time, for longer than most people ever pause to consider. As the Carboniferous gave way to the Permian period, around 299 million years ago, the world began to dry. Vast swamps receded. Deserts spread across the interior of the great supercontinent Pangaea, and life, faced with less water and harsher air, began to adapt in genuinely strange directions. Directions that, in hindsight, look far more like mammals than like anything reptilian at all. Dimetrodon, one of the most recognizable of these Permian giants, is often mistaken for a dinosaur, though it lived tens of millions of years before the first dinosaur ever existed. Growing up to 3.5 meters long, it carried along its spine a tall, sail-like structure of skin stretched over bony spines, likely used to regulate its body temperature. Warming quickly in morning sun, or perhaps signaling to rivals across a dry and rust-colored landscape. Even now, as your own body regulates its temperature quietly beneath the blanket, you are doing something Dimetrodon's descendants would spend the next 250 million years slowly perfecting. Dimetrodon belonged to a group called pelycosaurs, early members of the lineage that would, after unimaginable stretches of time and change, eventually lead to mammals. And, eventually, to you. Beneath the Permian sun stalked stranger and more fearsome giants still. Gorgonopsids, distant and ferocious relatives of that same mammal-adjacent lineage, were among the first true apex predators to hunt with saber-like canine teeth, some growing longer than a human finger, curving down from powerful jaws capable of delivering a single, decisive killing bite. Inostrancevia, one of the largest gorgonopsids, reached lengths of over 3 meters, prowling the floodplains of ancient Russia like a warning of predators still to come, hundreds of millions of years later. And yet, beneath the fierce and the fanged, gentler giants also grazed the Permian world. Scutosaurus, a heavily armored herbivore covered in bony plates and spines, resembled something between a tortoise and a small rhinoceros, moving in slow herds across the dry plains of what is now Russia, defended not by speed but by sheer, stubborn armor. An animal built entirely for enduring rather than escaping whatever the world threw at it. We still don't know exactly what color these ancient giants were. Fossils preserve bone and sometimes skin impressions, but pigment is a fragile, fleeting thing, and so the true palette of the Permian world, whether rust red, mottled gray, or something stranger still, remains one of its many gentle, unresolved mysteries. Paleoartists paint their best guesses, informed by living relatives and rare traces of preserved melanin. But much of the color of that ancient world is left, quite comfortably, to the imagination. Even as you rest tonight, warm and safe beneath a roof and a blanket, the Permian world these giants inhabited was, in its final stretch, drifting toward the single worst catastrophe life on Earth has ever endured. Around 252 million years ago, in an event now called the Permian-Triassic extinction, or sometimes simply the Great Dying, something happened that erased more than 90% of all marine species and roughly 70% of land species from the face of the Earth. The cause, most scientists now agree, was staggering volcanic activity in what is now Siberia. Eruptions so vast and so prolonged that they released enough carbon dioxide and sulfur to warm the entire planet, acidify its oceans, and strip much of its atmosphere of oxygen over the course of many thousands of years. It was not a single dramatic moment, no great flash of fire, but something slower, and in its own way, more unsettling. A long, grinding erosion of the conditions life had quietly relied upon for hundreds of millions of years. And yet, beneath even that catastrophe, something survived. A handful of small, unremarkable creatures, distant cousins of Dimetrodon's lineage, a few hardy reptiles, a scattering of resilient plants, endured the heat, the acid seas, the thinned and struggling air. It is one of the strangest and most comforting truths of deep time that extinction, even on this staggering scale, has never yet been complete. Something small, something quiet, something patient always seems to make it through. Beneath that same slow catastrophe, in ocean sediments far from the volcanic fury of Siberia, tiny reef-building organisms called foraminifera also nearly vanished, taking with them entire types of ancient reef ecosystems that would not be replaced by anything similar for millions of years. And still, in a few sheltered pockets of shallow, cooler water, some of the smallest reef builders persisted, quietly rebuilding, one microscopic shell at a time, the slow architecture the world would eventually need again. Even now, as you drift towards sleep, it is worth sitting for a moment with what came after the Great Dying. Not because it was fast, but because it was so achingly slow. It took the ocean's biodiversity nearly 10 million years to recover anything resembling its former richness. 10 million years is longer than the entire span of human existence, repeated hundreds of times over. And yet the Earth, unbothered by our human sense of urgency, simply waited and rebuilt at its own unhurried pace. Out of that long, quiet recovery rose the Triassic period, beginning around 251 million years ago, a world still empty in many of the ways the Permian world had once been full. Early on, few large animals existed at all. It was, in many respects, a world holding its breath, cautious, sparse, and slowly repopulating a planet that had so recently lost nearly everything. It was in this cautious, rebuilding world that the ancestors of the dinosaurs first appeared. Small, quick, unremarkable reptiles no larger than a house cat, walking upright on two legs among a landscape still dominated by other, stranger creatures entirely. These earliest dinosaur relatives were not yet giants. They were not yet rulers of anything. They were simply small, fast, and quietly present, waiting, as so many creatures before them had waited, for the world to change again. Sharing that same Triassic world were the true giants of their moment, enormous crocodile-like reptiles called pseudosuchians, some growing far larger than any dinosaur alive at the time. Saurosuchus, one of these ancient rulers, reached lengths of over 6 meters, with a heavy, muscular build and a bite that likely made it the dominant predator of its era. A giant whose living descendants today are only the comparatively modest crocodiles and alligators drifting through rivers around the world. Even now, as you rest, It is worth remembering that for tens of millions of years, in the earliest chapters of the Triassic, it was these crocodile-like giants, not dinosaurs, who ruled the world. The dinosaurs we now imagine as ancient rulers were, for a very long stretch of deep time, small, quiet understudies waiting patiently in the wings of a much larger and much stranger drama. Not every Ediacaran creature was flat, or quiet, or gentle in its habits. Kimberella, a small, oval, slug-like organism found in ancient Russian rock, appears to have grazed across microbial mats on the seafloor, leaving behind faint scratch marks where it fed. It is one of the earliest creatures we can say, with real confidence, actually moved with purpose from one place to another, dragging a soft body across the mud in search of something to eat. In its slow, deliberate wandering, it may be one of the first true animals in the modern sense. Not simply drifting, but choosing, in its own small way, where to go. Beneath the surface of those same ancient seas, tube-shaped creatures called Cloudina built the very first hard skeletons life had ever known. Tiny, stacked, cone-shaped structures of calcium carbonate, layered one atop the next like a stack of nested cups barely a few centimeters tall. Scientists believe these shells evolved specifically as protection, evidence that something, somewhere, had already learned to hunt softer creatures with a mouth or a boring, drilling motion. Even in this earliest hint of predation, there is a strange comfort. The first armor and the first appetite appeared together, each answering the other. We still don't know what triggered the wave of extinctions that ended the Ediacaran world just before the Cambrian began. Some scientists suspect the newly evolved predators themselves were responsible, hunting the old, soft, undefended forms into scarcity. Others point to shifting oxygen levels in ancient oceans. Whatever the cause, the transition feels, in hindsight, like a held breath finally released. One world's quiet ending becoming almost seamlessly the next world's noisy beginning. Among the strangest Cambrian creatures ever found is Hallucigenia, a spiny, worm-like animal barely a few centimeters long, covered in rows of paired spines along its back and pairs of thin, clawed legs beneath. For decades after its discovery, paleontologists could not agree which side was its back and which was its front, or even which way was up. It remains, even now, one of the most delightfully strange creatures ever pulled from ancient stone. Proof that evolution's early sketches were sometimes closer to dreams than to any careful plan. Opabinia, another Cambrian oddity, had 5 mushroom-shaped eyes perched atop its head and a long, flexible, hose-like snout ending in a small claw used to grasp prey and pass it back toward a mouth positioned, unusually, facing backward beneath its head. When it was first described, scientists reportedly laughed at the reconstruction, certain no such creature could have existed. And yet it did, drifting through Cambrian waters more than 500 million years ago, entirely unconcerned with how strange it might one day seem. Even as you rest tonight, your own eyes carry forward a design first tested across dozens of different Cambrian experiments. Trilobites saw the world through compound eyes made of many lenses. Opabinia saw it through 5 separate eyes on stalks. Somewhere among these ancient, competing designs, the single lens eye that eventually became your own slowly proved itself the most useful, refined across hundreds of millions of years into the 2 quiet, closed eyes resting behind your eyelids right now. Wiwaxia, covered in overlapping, scale-like plates and long defensive spines running down its back, resembled something between an armored slug and a sea urchin unrolled flat. It likely grazed on microbial mats much like Kimberella did, moving slowly and cautiously across the seafloor, its spines offering a quiet, prickly deterrent to any Cambrian predator considering a meal. We still don't know exactly which modern group of animals it belongs to. Mollusk, or something else entirely, or something in between that no longer exists. And yet, amid so much strangeness, the Cambrian also produced Morella, one of the most abundant fossils found in Canada's famous Burgess Shale. A small, spiny arthropod resembling a tiny, delicate crown with long, backward-curving spines and a body barely a centimeter long. It was almost certainly harmless, a small scavenger sifting through sediment for scraps, one of the quiet, uncounted majority of Cambrian life that asked for nothing more dramatic than a meal and a place to rest. As Ordovician oceans warmed and filled with new life, the first true coral reefs began to form, built not by the corals familiar to modern divers, but by early tabulate and rugose corals working alongside sponges and calcifying algae. These reefs, though ancient and strange in their exact composition, functioned much as coral reefs do now, as shelter, as nursery, as a slow architecture built collectively by countless small lives working, without any awareness of doing so, towards something far larger than any one of them. Beneath these early reefs swam some of the first true fish with functioning jaws, called acanthodians, small and spiny, distant and humble ancestors of nearly every jawed vertebrate alive today, including you. Before jaws existed, feeding meant sucking, filtering, or absorbing. Slow, passive methods with real limits. The jaw, once it appeared, changed everything, opening a vast new range of things a creature could eat, and just as importantly, a vast new range of things a creature could now be eaten by. Even now, as your own jaw rests slack and unclenched in sleep, it carries forward one of the most consequential inventions in the entire history of life. A hinge first perfected in small, spiny Ordovician fish, refined across hundreds of millions of years into the exact mechanism that let you yawn earlier tonight without even thinking about it. The Ordovician also gave rise to some of the earliest starfish and sea urchins, echinoderms whose 5-point symmetry remains, even now, one of the more elegant and mysterious body plans in the animal kingdom. Unlike nearly every other successful lineage, echinoderms abandon the simple left-right symmetry most animals rely on, choosing instead a radial design with no clear front or back. It seems like something we should understand more fully by now. Why this one lineage found such lasting success in such an unusual shape. And yet the answer remains only partially known. Graptolites, small colonial creatures resembling delicate, branching combs, drifted through Ordovician and Silurian seas in vast numbers, so abundant and so precisely evolving that geologists now use their fossils to date rock layers with remarkable accuracy across the ancient world. Each colony was a cooperative structure, dozens or hundreds of tiny individuals sharing a single branching skeleton, filtering the water together for the smallest particles of food. Proof that even in the earliest oceans, some creatures had already discovered that survival is often easier shared. As Silurian seas grew calmer after the great Ordovician extinction, jawless fish called ostracoderms, armored in thick bony plates along their heads and shoulders, diversified into a striking range of shapes, some flattened and bottom-dwelling, others slim and fast, darting through open water. None of them had jaws yet, feeding instead by filtering or scraping, but their armor suggests a world already crowded with things worth being armored against. Beneath the water, in the same Silurian shallows patrolled by giant sea scorpions, some of the very first vascular plants with internal tubes for carrying water, began forming small, low mats along muddy shorelines. Cooksonia, one of the earliest known, stood barely a few centimeters tall, a simple branching stalk with no leaves at all, capped by small spore-producing structures. It looked, by any modern standard, unremarkable. And yet it represents one of the most consequential moments in the entire history of life, the point at which green things first learned to stand. Even beneath your closed eyes tonight, it is worth imagining that first small stalk of Cooksonia, swaying gently in a breeze it had, in some evolutionary sense, only just learned to withstand. The wind itself, a new and unfamiliar force to any living thing that had spent nearly 4 billion years submerged in the settling calm of water. The early Devonian saw fish diversify into an extraordinary range of forms, among them the strange and heavily armored Bothriolepis, a placoderm with a bony, box-like head shield and paired jointed appendages used, most likely, for slowly walking or pushing itself along riverbeds and lake bottoms. It was neither fast nor fierce, but it was remarkably successful. Its fossils found on nearly every continent, a reminder that survival often favors the adaptable over the impressive. Cladocelashae, one of the earliest sharks with a body plan we would recognize today, swam through Devonian seas with a streamlined, torpedo-shaped body and rows of sharp, replaceable teeth. Unlike its placoderm neighbors, it had no bony armor at all, relying instead on speed and a flexible, cartilage skeleton. A design so effective that, in its broad outline, it remains almost unchanged in the sharks gliding through modern oceans right now. Somewhere, in the quiet dark beneath a moon much like the one outside your window tonight. We still don't know precisely why placoderms, once so dominant and so varied, vanished so completely by the end of the Devonian, leaving barely a trace among the ancestors of modern fish. Some scientists suspect competition from sharks and early bony fish. Others point to the same environmental upheavals that caused the era's mass extinction. Their disappearance remains one of the quieter mysteries of the ancient world. An entire, successful lineage, gone, with the reasons only partially recovered from stone. Beneath the shallow, plant-choked pools of the late Devonian Ichthyostega, one of the earliest true tetrapods, pulled itself along on 4 sturdy limbs, each ending in more toes than any land animal has today. 7 on its hind feet, in a still experimental design evolution had not yet settled on the now familiar 5. It likely spent most of its life in water, using its limbs more for pushing through shallow vegetation than for true walking. A creature caught in the unhurried, in-between space between one world and the next. Even now, as your own 5 fingers rest curled beneath a blanket, it is worth remembering that 5 was not always the obvious number. Early tetrapods experimented with 6, 7, even 8 digits before the pattern settled, across many millions of years, into the 5-fingered design carried forward into nearly every land vertebrate alive today, including the very hand that may, right now, be tucked quietly beneath your cheek. As the Carboniferous forests thickened, amphibians grew to sizes that would seem impossible today. Ariops, a heavy-bodied, crocodile-like amphibian nearly 2 meters long, hunted along the margins of swamps and rivers with a wide, powerful skull and rows of sharp teeth, an ambush predator built low and strong, more at home wallowing in mud than chasing anything across open ground. Diplocaulus, stranger still, developed a wide, boomerang-shaped skull flaring out on either side of its head, a shape scientists believe may have helped it glide through water or discouraged predators from attempting to swallow it whole. It is one of the more delightfully odd silhouettes in the fossil record, a creature that looked, in outline, almost more like a strange arrowhead than any animal you might picture tonight, drifting through a warm, still, ancient pool. Beneath the towering lycopod trees of the Carboniferous, plants related more closely to modern club mosses than to any tree alive today, some reaching 30 meters into a warm, humid sky. Giant cockroach-like insects and early beetles scuttled through leaf litter far richer and deeper than any forest floor today. decomposition in this rich, oxygen-heavy world moved slowly, allowing organic matter to build up across centuries into the very coal seams still quietly warming parts of the modern world tonight. We still don't fully know why insects, so dominant in size during the Carboniferous, shrank so significantly in the periods that followed. The leading explanation involves declining oxygen levels, making it harder for their simple tube-based breathing systems to fuel a larger body, though the rise of flying vertebrates as new competitors and predators may have played a quiet role as well. Sometimes, in the long story of life, growing smaller is simply the safer, more enduring choice. As the Permian world dried and the great supercontinent Pangaea took its final, unified shape, Edaphosaurus, a plant-eating relative of Dimetrodon, developed its own tall, sail-like spine structure. Though unlike its more famous predatory cousin, its sail was studded with small crossbars, giving it a strange, comb-like silhouette as it grazed slowly across increasingly arid Permian plains, entirely uninterested in anything resembling a hunt. Moschops, a heavily built herbivore with an unusually thick, domed skull, may have used head-butting contests to settle disputes over territory or mates, its skull bones thickened enough to absorb repeated, forceful impacts. It moved on 4 short, sturdy legs, low and wide, built for stability rather than speed, an animal seemingly untroubled by the idea of ever needing to run from anything at all. And still, beneath the sun of the late Permian, small burrowing creatures called Dicynodonts thrived in extraordinary numbers, some no larger than a rabbit, others the size of a small cow, nearly all of them equipped with a distinctive beak-like mouth and a single pair of tusks. They were, for a time, among the most successful herbivores on the planet, grazing tough, fibrous Permian vegetation with a bite mechanism unlike anything that came before or, in truth, anything that has come since. Even as you rest tonight, breathing slowly, it is worth pausing on the fact that Dicynodonts, like Dimetrodon and the Gorgonopsids before them, belong to a broad lineage now called synapsids. The same ancient branch of the family tree that would, after the Great Dying and tens of millions of years of quiet, patient continuation, eventually lead to the very first mammals, and much later, to you, resting here in a bed, on a night quite unlike any Permian evening ever was. The extinction that ended the Permian did not happen everywhere at once, nor in a single dramatic instant. Ocean sediments from this time reveal a slow, uneven collapse spanning perhaps 60,000 years, a staggering length by human measure, and yet remarkably brief by the standards of deep geological time. Species didn't vanish in a single afternoon. They faded unevenly, region by region, as the air thinned and the seas warmed and acidified around them, in a decline that must have felt, to any creature capable of noticing it all, like a very long and very strange summer that simply never ended. In its aftermath, so few large land animals survived that early Triassic ecosystems appear, in the fossil record, almost eerily sparse. Small, burrowing reptiles, a handful of surviving amphibians, and vast stretches of red, oxidized rock hinting at deserts far larger and drier than anything the Permian world had known. Even now, geologists refer to this stretch as the Triassic Recovery Gap, a quiet, unhurried pause the Earth seemed to need before it could once again fill itself with giants. Lystrosaurus, one of the very few large land animals to survive the Great Dying in real abundance, was a stout, pig-sized Dicynodont with a short tail and sturdy limbs, found in fossil form across nearly every continent on Earth today. A distribution that, more than almost any other single fact, helped confirm that all the continents had once been joined together as Pangaea. For millions of years after the extinction, It may have been one of the single most common land animals anywhere on the planet, a quiet, resilient survivor thriving in the wreckage of a devastated world. As Triassic life slowly diversified again, the first true reptiles resembling modern crocodiles, called phytosaurs, spread across rivers and floodplains, their long, narrow snouts and armored backs looking remarkably similar to crocodiles, despite having evolved the resemblance entirely independently, hundreds of millions of years before any true crocodile existed. It is one of evolution's quieter, recurring lessons. Certain shapes, certain solutions to the problem of hunting in water seem to get discovered again and again by entirely unrelated creatures across entirely unrelated stretches of time. Pastosakis, a large, land-dwelling relative of the crocodile lineage, walked upright on two powerful hind legs, standing perhaps 4 meters long, likely one of the dominant land predators of its particular corner of the Middle Triassic world. Its resemblance to a small dinosaur is striking enough that early reconstructions sometimes mistook it for one. A reminder that, for a very long stretch of the Triassic, the line between dinosaur and non-dinosaur giant was far blurrier and far less important than it would later become. And yet, quietly, almost invisibly, among the ferns and cycads of the Middle Triassic, the very first true mammals were beginning to appear. Tiny, shrew-sized creatures, likely nocturnal, likely insect-eating, easily overlooked by anything larger sharing their world. They were not impressive. They left almost no mark on their era at all. And yet, in the unhurried, patient logic of deep time, it was these small, quiet, forgettable creatures, not the towering crocodile kings around them, who would eventually give rise to nearly every warm, breathing, milk-feeding creature alive today, including, at the very end of an impossibly long and quiet thread, you. Even now, as you rest, it is worth sitting with the strange comfort of that thought. The ancestors that mattered most to your own existence were rarely the largest, or the fiercest, or the most celebrated creatures of their time. They were the small ones, the quiet ones, the ones simply built to endure, patiently, until the world had room for them to become something more. We still don't know exactly what those first tiny mammals sounded like, or how they moved through the undergrowth beneath the feet of giants, or what, if anything, they dreamed as they slept through the daylight hours in burrows and hollow logs. But it seems fitting, somehow, that the earliest ancestors of every sleeping mammal alive today were themselves creatures built around rest, hidden, quiet, and safe, waiting for the cover of darkness before venturing out into a Triassic world still ruled by giants far larger than themselves. Long before any of these named creatures existed, the very oceans themselves had to be built, chemically, into something capable of supporting life at all. Early Earth's atmosphere held almost no free oxygen, and for nearly 2 billion years, the only organisms breathing anything resembling air were tiny, ancient bacteria performing a kind of photosynthesis, slowly, patiently, releasing oxygen as a quiet byproduct into oceans that had never known it before. This long, unhurried transformation is sometimes called the Great Oxidation Event, and it remains one of the most consequential and least celebrated moments in the entire history of the planet. A change so slow, it likely went unnoticed by anything capable of noticing, and yet without it, nothing that breathes today, including you, would ever have had the air it needed. Even now, as your lungs rise and fall beneath the blanket, you are drawing on an inheritance nearly 2.5 billion years in the making. Oxygen first exhaled, so to speak, by microscopic ancestors with no lungs, no eyes, and no awareness that they were quietly building the very air that would, unthinkably far in the future, allow something like you to rest peacefully in the dark. Beneath the more famous Ediacaran creatures already described tonight, smaller and even less understood forms drifted through the same ancient seas. Tribrachidium, a small, disc-shaped organism with a strange, three-armed spiral pattern etched across its surface, resembled nothing alive today so closely that scientists still debate whether it belongs to any group we would recognize at all. It may have simply sat, low and still, filtering whatever drifted past, an entire, separate experiment in what a living thing could be, quietly abandoned by evolution long before the Cambrian even began. Trilobites themselves, so often mentioned as a single group, were in truth astonishingly diverse. More than 20,000 distinct species have been identified, spanning nearly the entire length of the Paleozoic era. Some, like the aptly named Olenoides, curled into a tight, protective ball when threatened, much as a modern pillbug does today. Others burrowed into soft sediment, eyes reduced or vanished entirely, trading sight for safety in the deep, undisturbed dark. Proof that even in ancient seas, some creatures already understood the particular comfort of retreating somewhere quiet and unseen. Even now, as you curl slightly beneath your own blanket, there is something quietly familiar in that ancient trilobite instinct. The simple, universal comfort of drawing inward, of making yourself small and folded and safe, a gesture repeated by countless creatures across countless eras, including, tonight, by you. Among the Ordovician's stranger inhabitants were the Eurypterid's early, smaller cousins, alongside vast beds of brachiopods. Shelled, filter-feeding animals that, despite resembling clams at a glance, belong to an entirely separate and much older lineage. Some Ordovician brachiopod beds stretched for many kilometers along ancient seafloors, so dense and so numerous that their compressed shells now form entire layers of limestone quarried across the modern world. A quiet, calcified monument to some of the humblest and most successful creatures ever to exist. Beneath the water column, in the deeper, darker reaches of Ordovician oceans, early cephalopods experimented endlessly with shell shape. Some coiled tightly like a modern nautilus, others straight as a spear, others curved gently like a drawn bow. It seems like something worth knowing more fully, why so many different shapes persisted side by side for so long, each apparently successful in its own particular way, rather than one simply outcompeting all the rest. Perhaps the ancient ocean, vast and varied as it was, simply had room enough for many different, equally good answers to the same question. By the middle of the Silurian, some Eurypterids had begun venturing, briefly and cautiously, onto land itself. Not to live there permanently, but perhaps to molt in safety, away from hungry, opportunistic neighbors still confined to the water. Trackways preserved in ancient sandstone show long, paired scrape marks consistent with a large, many-legged animal briefly dragging itself across damp sand, one of the very first hints, however fleeting, of an animal life that might one day belong as much to land as to sea. Even now, it is worth noting how strange and quiet that first venture onto land must have been. No fanfare, no witnesses, simply a heavy, armored creature pulling itself a short distance across wet sand in search of nothing more dramatic than a safer place to shed its old shell, unaware that it was rehearsing, in the smallest possible way, a transition the whole of life would eventually follow. Devonian seas also held vast reef systems built primarily by stromatoporoids, sponge-like organisms that constructed dense, layered mounds of calcium carbonate far larger and more elaborate than the humble stromatolites of billions of years before. Some of these ancient reef structures, preserved today in places like Western Canada, grew to be hundreds of meters across quiet limestone cities built one filtering, patient organism at a time, sheltering countless smaller creatures within their calcified folds. Among the fish sharing these reef waters, Dunkleosteus was far from alone in its size. Titanic these, a similarly enormous placoderm reaching lengths of 5 or 6 meters, appears to have had a far weaker, less specialized jaw, leading scientists to suspect it may have fed instead on tiny plankton, filtering enormous mouthfuls of water, much as some of the largest whales do today. It is a strange and gentle thought that alongside one of the fiercest predators ever to swim, an equally enormous creature drifted quietly through the same waters, entirely uninterested in anything but the smallest, softest food the ocean had to offer. Even as the late Devonian extinction reshaped the oceans, life on land continued its slow, stubborn advance. Early ferns and seed-bearing plants called progymnosperms began developing true roots and, eventually, wood. A rigid, supportive tissue that allowed plants, for the first time, to grow tall without buckling under their own weight. Archaeopteris, one of the earliest true trees, could reach heights of 10 meters or more, its fallen leaves enriching soil in a way no plant before it ever had, quietly setting the stage for the vast, humid forests still to come. The Carboniferous swamps were not silent, vast choruses of insects, the ancestors of crickets and grasshoppers among them, almost certainly filled these warm, humid forests with sound, though no fossil can preserve a single note of it. We are left only to imagine the particular hum of a 300-million-year-old evening, layered with the rustle of towering lycopods and the occasional heavy beat of a dragonfly's wing nearly the length of your own hand. Beneath the forest canopy, early reptiles called Hylonomus, small and lizard-like, no longer than your hand, represent some of the very first animals to lay eggs on land rather than in water. A development called the amniotic egg, a small, self-contained pond sealed inside a protective shell, allowing a developing embryo to grow safely far from any lake or river at all. It is, in its quiet way, one of the more elegant solutions life has ever devised, carrying the water you need inside a shell, rather than needing to return to it. Even now, in whatever room you are resting in, you are surrounded by objects and comforts unimaginable to any carboniferous creature. And yet the amniotic egg's basic principle, a sealed, self-sufficient environment carried wherever it's needed, echoes forward even into the placenta that once, quietly and invisibly, carried you before you were born, sealed and safe, long before you ever took a single breath of your own. The Permian world was also home to Helicoprion, a stranger and more puzzling creature than nearly any other on this list. A shark-like fish whose lower jaw held a spiraling whorl of teeth, curling inward like the shell of a nautilus. For decades, scientists could not agree how such a structure could possibly function inside a living mouth. Current reconstructions suggest it sat low in the jaw, rotating slowly as new teeth pushed the old ones inward, a strange, built-in conveyor belt of teeth unlike anything found in any creature alive today. Beneath the drier stretches of the Permian world, early relatives of the reptile lineage called archosauromorphs began quietly diversifying as well, small and unassuming compared to the great synapsid giants sharing their world, patiently exploring body shapes and habits that would, tens of millions of years later, eventually flower into crocodiles, into the great Triassic pseudosuchians, and eventually into the dinosaurs themselves. Nothing about them, at at the time suggested any of this. They were simply small and quiet and present, as so many of history's most consequential creatures have been. We still don't know exactly how many Permian species existed in total, since the fossil record, however rich, captures only a small and uneven fraction of everything that ever lived. Entire lineages may have flourished and vanished, leaving no trace at all, in swamps that never fossilized, on continents whose rock has since eroded into the sea. The full richness of that ancient sunlit world is, in the truest sense, unrecoverable. And there is something oddly peaceful in accepting that not everything that ever mattered needs to be remembered in order to have been real. Even now, as sleep gathers gently at the edges of your thoughts, it is worth remembering that the Permian extinction, as devastating as it was, still left enough behind to eventually rebuild an entire world twice over. First into the age of giant reptiles that followed, and later, after another catastrophe entirely, into the age of mammals that eventually included you. Endings in the deep story of this planet have never yet been quite as final as they seem in the moment. The early Triassic recovery also saw the rise of coelophysis-like early archosaurs distinct from true dinosaurs. Small, agile, and quick, filling ecological niches left empty by the Great Dying. Alongside them, temnospondyle amphibians, distant and much larger cousins of Archaeops, persisted in shrinking numbers, holding on to rivers and lakes even as the drier, reptile-dominated landscape around them slowly, steadily expanded. Beneath the red Triassic soil, burrows preserved in stone suggest that many small reptiles and early mammal relatives spent much of their lives underground, sheltering from a harsh, unpredictable surface world still recovering from catastrophe. It is one of the quieter, more comforting patterns in this entire ancient story. Again and again, across extinction after extinction, it is the creatures willing to retreat, to shelter, to wait patiently underground or in the dark, who so often emerge, eventually, into whatever comes next. And so, even now, as you lie sheltered beneath your own roof, in your own quiet dark, you are doing something that has worked across nearly 4 billion years of trial and disaster and slow, patient rebuilding, again and again, resting safely, while the wider world continues on without needing anything further from you tonight. Before any of the giants of this story could exist, the continents themselves had to wander into position, slowly, over hundreds of millions of years, in a process called plate tectonics that continues imperceptibly beneath your feet even tonight. Land masses that would one day become Africa and North America and Antarctica drifted together and apart across ancient oceans whose names, Panthalassa, Iapetus, Reich, belong to seas that no longer exist in any recognizable form. It seems like something worth knowing more fully, how such enormous plates of rock could drift at roughly the speed a fingernail grows. And yet, given enough of that same slow patience, the rest of this story keeps returning to entire oceans opened and closed, again and again. Even now, the ground beneath your home is moving by some tiny, unfelt fraction in exactly this same ancient, unhurried way. A reminder that stillness, even now, is something of a comforting illusion, layered gently over a world that has never actually stopped shifting since it first cooled enough to form a solid crust at all. Among the earliest and strangest of ediacaran fossils is Arkarua, a small, button-like impression found in the ancient rocks of South Australia, so faint and so simple that some scientists once suspected it might not be a fossil at all, but rather the trace of a much later burrowing creature. If it is indeed an animal, It may represent one of the very earliest echinoderms, a distant ancestor, however faint and uncertain, of the starfish and sea urchins that would only fully flourish much later in the richer waters of the Ordovician seas. Namacalathus, another ediacaran creature, resembled a small goblet or vase anchored by a short stalk to the seafloor, its cup-shaped body possibly filtering tiny particles from passing currents. It lived in dense colonies along ancient reef margins, one of the earliest known animals to build any kind of hard, calcified skeleton at all. A quiet forerunner to the vast armored and shelled world the Cambrian explosion would soon unleash. Beneath the more famous Cambrian predators, countless smaller, gentler creatures filled the muddy seafloor as well. Priapulid worms, resembling small, spiny cucumbers with a retractable, tooth-lined proboscis, burrowed through Cambrian sediment in extraordinary numbers, and their close living relatives can still be found today, largely unchanged in cold, muddy seafloors around the modern world. One of the quieter, more persistent survivors of this entire ancient story, having simply found 500 million years ago a way of life so effective it never needed to change. Even now, in mud at the bottom of oceans you may never see, tiny creatures nearly identical to their 500 million-year-old ancestors continue burrowing in exactly the same patient, unhurried way. Proof that some solutions, once found, are simply good enough to last, essentially unchanged, across almost the entire span of animal life on Earth. Among the Cambrians' more elegant inventions was Anomalocaris' smaller, gentler cousin, Peytoia, whose fossilized mouthparts were initially mistaken, quite understandably, for the body of a jellyfish, leading to decades of confused classification before the true, larger animal it belonged to was properly understood. It is a small, charming reminder that even careful science sometimes needs to reassemble a puzzle several times before the picture becomes clear. Deep time does not always hand over its secrets in tidy, complete pieces. Ordovician seas also held some of the earliest true jawless fish with bony, external armor, called astraspids, small and unassuming, rarely longer than a few centimeters, feeding by sucking small particles from the seafloor through a simple, jawless mouth. They were neither fast nor fierce, but their presence, however modest, marks one of the earliest branches on the long, patient tree that would eventually lead, hundreds of millions of years later, to every fish, amphibian, reptile, bird, and mammal alive on Earth today. Beneath the Ordovician waves, early corals began forming small, solitary structures before eventually clustering into the colonial reefs mentioned earlier tonight. A reminder that even reef building, one of nature's great collective achievements, likely began with countless small, solitary individuals, each simply doing its own small, patient work, long before anything resembling true cooperation emerged. The Silurian period, often overshadowed by the more dramatic eras around it, was in truth a time of remarkable quiet stability, its warm, shallow seas producing a wealth of reef life and giant arthropods with comparatively few large disruptions. Geologists sometimes describe it as one of the calmer chapters in the Paleozoic story. Proof that not every important era in deep time needs to be defined by catastrophe or explosive change. Sometimes, entire tens of millions of years pass simply governed by quiet, steady accumulation. Even now, it is worth letting that same steady, unremarkable calm settle over you. Not every night needs a dramatic ending. Not every era, ancient or personal, needs to be defined by its upheavals. Sometimes, like the Silurian seas, the quietest stretches are simply the ones where life is allowed gently to continue. Devonian forests, though still young and low by later standards, were nonetheless already reshaping the planet's climate in subtle ways. As roots spread deeper into once bare soil, they accelerated the weathering of rock, drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere at a pace the planet had rarely experienced before. Some scientists believe this early greening may have contributed to the global cooling associated with the late Devonian extinction, a quiet reminder that even the gentlest, most beneficial seeming changes can ripple outward in ways no single creature or plant could ever have intended. Among the Devonian's stranger fish was Bandringa, an early relative of modern sharks with a long, flattened, paddle-like snout, likely used to sense prey buried in soft sediment. Found in both freshwater and marine deposits, it suggests some of the earliest sharks may have moved between rivers and open ocean, much as certain sharks still do today, following food and safety across boundaries that, to a fish, have never mattered quite as much as they do to a map. Carboniferous skies, though still lacking any true flying vertebrate, were nonetheless filled with the earliest gliding and flying insects. Not just the enormous Meganeura already described, but also early mayflies and cockroach ancestors, filling the humid air with a constant, low hum of wings. Fossilized wings from this period show remarkably intricate, vein-laced patterns, some of the finest and most delicate structures preserved from this entire ancient chapter of the story. Even now, if you listen closely enough in memory to any warm summer evening you've ever spent outdoors, there is a small, quiet continuity in that sound. The hum and click of insect wings, a texture of the world that has, in its broad outline, remained remarkably constant across 300 million years of otherwise staggering change. Beneath the Carboniferous swamps, some of the earliest seed-bearing plants, called pteridosperms or seed ferns, began producing a new kind of reproductive structure entirely. A seed capable of surviving dry conditions and delaying growth until circumstances were favorable, unlike the spores of earlier plants, which needed near constant moisture to succeed. It was, in its quiet botanical way, another version of the same lesson the amniotic egg would soon teach the animal world: carrying your own future safely inside a sealed, self-sufficient shell and waiting patiently for the right moment to begin. The Permian world Scutosaurus, mentioned earlier tonight, belonged to a broader group called parasaurs, several species of which developed increasingly elaborate bony knobs and spikes across their skulls and backs. Not for hunting, but almost certainly for defense, and, in some cases, for display, silently signaling health or size to rivals and potential mates across the dry Permian plains. Armor, it seems, has always served more than one purpose: protecting a body while quietly speaking, in its own visual language, to everything nearby. Beneath the fiercest gorgonopsids, smaller and gentler therocephalians, another branch of the same broad synapsid lineage, filled a wide range of ecological roles across the Permian world, some small and insect-eating, others larger and more heavily built. It is worth remembering tonight that no single era is ever populated by only its giants and its terrors. For every gorgonopsid stalking the floodplains, there were dozens of smaller, quieter creatures simply going about the unglamorous business of surviving one more day. Even now, this same pattern holds true in every ecosystem alive on Earth. The impressive, the fierce, and the enormous receive most of the attention, while the small, the quiet, and the numerous do most of the actual, patient work of keeping a living world running. It is, perhaps, a gentle thing to remember about your own life as well, tonight, as you rest. That quiet, small, unglamorous persistence has always mattered every bit as much as any singular, celebrated moment. We still don't know precisely how warm-blooded, in the modern sense, any of the great Permian synapsids truly were. Some evidence, drawn from bone structure and inferred growth rates, suggests certain species may have been partway toward true warm-bloodedness, caught in an evolutionary space between the cold-blooded reptiles that came before and the fully warm-blooded mammals that would eventually follow. It is one of the more delicate, ongoing questions in paleontology. Not a simple yes or no, but a slow, gradual dial being turned, almost imperceptibly, across tens of millions of years. As the Triassic world recovered and diversified further, small, gliding reptiles called cuneosaurs developed elongated ribs supporting wide flaps of skin, allowing them to glide, however briefly and clumsily, from tree to tree. An early, independent experiment in a kind of flight that reptiles, birds, and mammals would each go on to rediscover in their own separate ways, again and again across. The deep future's still waiting beyond this story, and beneath the towering crocodile-like giants of the Middle Triassic, the small, shrew-like early mammal relatives mentioned earlier tonight continued their quiet, patient existence largely unnoticed, waiting through a world of much larger, much louder neighbors for their own unhurried moment, still tens of millions of years away, to finally, gently arrive. Even now, as sleep continues to gather softly around you, it is worth returning one last time to that same quiet lesson, repeated across nearly every era of this impossibly long story. The giants rarely last, and the quiet, small, patient things very often do. There is nothing you need to prove tonight. There is nowhere you need to hurry to. You are already, simply by resting here, doing exactly what worked, again and again, across nearly 4 billion years of trial, disaster, and quiet, patient continuation. Beneath the story already told, tonight sits a quieter, parallel story of the ocean's own chemistry slowly changing across these same hundreds of millions of years. Early Cambrian seas were rich in dissolved silica, which is likely why so many of the earliest hard skeletons were built from that mineral rather than the calcium carbonate that would later dominate. As ocean chemistry shifted, gradually, across tens of millions of years, calcium-based shells became more favorable, and the entire architecture of marine life quietly reorganized itself around a different set of raw materials. A reminder that even something as fundamental as what a shell is made of has never been fixed or guaranteed, but simply a passing accommodation to a world in slow, constant flux. Among the lesser-known Cambrian giants was Titanochores, a relative of Anomalocaris discovered more recently in Canadian rock, with a wide, helmet-like head shield nearly half a meter across, making its total body length comparable to a large dog. It likely swept along the seafloor, stirring up sediment in search of soft-bodied prey. One of the largest and most formidable animals in any ocean on Earth at the time it lived, 500 million years ago, in seas that still had no fish with jaws to challenge it. The Ordovician extinction that ended so many of these giants may have been intensified, some scientists now believe, by a nearby stellar event, a supernova or series of gamma-ray bursts occurring within a few thousand light-years of Earth, briefly damaging the planet's ozone layer and allowing harmful radiation to reach species already struggling with a cooling climate. It seems like something we should know for certain by now, whether the stars themselves once reached down and touched the ancient sea. And yet the evidence remains suggestive rather than settled. A quiet, cosmic, maybe folded into an already complicated ancient catastrophe. Even now, as you rest beneath whatever sky covers your home tonight, it is worth sitting for a moment with the strange, humbling possibility that the light of a long-dead star may once have reached all the way down into an ancient ocean and quietly reshaped the future of everything living in it. A reminder that this planet has never been entirely alone in its own story. However small and self-contained, that story can sometimes feel. Silurian reefs, in addition to their eurypterids and early fish, hosted enormous colonies of crinoids. Delicate, flower-like animals related to starfish, anchored to the seafloor by long, jointed stalks, their feathery arms swaying gently in ancient currents to catch drifting food. Some fossil beds preserve so many crinoids in such density that entire quarry walls appear to be made almost entirely of their stacked and layered remains. A quiet stone garden frozen mid-sway for over 400 million years. Acanthostega, a close cousin of Ichthyostega already mentioned tonight, had broad, paddle-like limbs ending in 8 distinct digits, still more evidence that evolution experimented widely with limb design before eventually favoring 5. It is likely to have spent nearly all of its life in the water, its limbs better suited to paddling through weed-choked shallows than to any true walking on land. A creature testing the shape of a solution long before that solution was truly needed. Panderichthys, another transitional fish of the late Devonian, had a flattened head and reduced fins compared to earlier lobe-finned fish, suggesting it lived in extremely shallow water or briefly exposed mudflats, breathing air when necessary through simple, primitive lungs. A feature it shares, in modified form, with nearly every land vertebrate that would eventually follow it, including, in your own body tonight, the 2 lungs quietly rising and falling beneath your ribs as you drift towards sleep. We still don't know exactly when the first true lung appeared, since the earliest fish, including some living species today, already possess simple lung-like structures used to supplement the oxygen taken in through gills. It may be that lungs are not, in truth, a dramatic new invention at all, but rather an ancient, quiet feature carried forward almost unchanged from a common ancestor far older than any fish discussed tonight. One more thread of continuity stretching back further into the dark than most of this story has yet reached. Among the largest amphibians to ever exist was Prionosuchus, a Permian giant resembling an enormous crocodile more than any modern amphibian, reaching lengths of perhaps 9 meters, nearly the length of a city bus. It likely lurked in rivers and swamps much as crocodiles do today, an ambush predator whose sheer size makes it one of the true forgotten giants of this entire ancient story, its lineage vanishing so completely that nothing quite like it has existed since. Meganeuropsis, a slightly later and even larger relative of the dragonfly-like Meganeura, may have reached a wingspan approaching 75 centimeters, making it very likely the largest flying insect that has ever existed on Earth in any era, before or since. It patrolled Carboniferous and early Permian skies with a silent, gliding hunt, its enormous compound eyes able to detect the slightest motion of smaller prey against a warm, humid, oxygen-rich sky unlike any sky above you tonight. Xenacanthus, a freshwater shark of the late Paleozoic, had a long, eel-like body and a distinctive spine projecting backward from behind its head, quite unlike any shark alive today. It hunted in rivers and lakes rather than open ocean, one of several ancient shark lineages that quietly experimented with freshwater life long before most modern sharks settled almost entirely into the sea. Stemenococcus, one of the stranger Permian synapsids, had a broad, heavy skull decorated with blunt, bony knobs projecting outward like a strange, ornamental crown, likely used for display or ritualized combat rather than true predation. Alongside it lived Antiosaurus, a considerably fiercer and more heavily built relative, among the largest land predators of its particular place and time, with a massive skull built for delivering a single, crushing bite to prey far smaller than itself. Titanophonius, a close relative of Ankylosaurus found in the red rock of ancient Russia, reached lengths of nearly 3 meters, its name meaning, quite directly, Titanic Murderer. A dramatic label for a creature that, in truth, likely spent most of its life doing nothing more dramatic than resting in the shade, conserving energy between the relatively brief, intense bursts of hunting that punctuated an otherwise quiet, patient existence. Even now, it is worth remembering that even the fiercest sounding giants of this ancient world spent the overwhelming majority of their lives at rest, sheltering from heat, digesting a recent meal, or simply waiting, still and quiet, for the right moment to act. Predation, however dramatic it sounds in any documentary, was never the main activity of any predator's day. Rest, patience, and stillness always made up the greater share of an ancient giant's life, just as they make up the greater share of yours. Beneath the Permian's drier plains, early conifers and ginkgo relatives began quietly appearing among the older lycopods and seed ferns, better suited to the increasingly arid conditions spreading across the heart of Pangaea. Unlike the towering, water-hungry forests of the Carboniferous, these new plants could tolerate longer dry spells, their tough, narrow leaves conserving moisture in a world that increasingly rewarded patience and restraint over lush, rapid growth. We still don't fully understand every detail of how Pangaea's interior climate functioned, though evidence from ancient red rock layers, called red beds, suggests vast stretches of seasonal desert, punctuated by rare, dramatic monsoon rains sweeping in from surrounding seas. It would have been a landscape of long, quiet stillness, broken occasionally by sudden, overwhelming abundance. A rhythm not unlike the quiet, patient breathing this whole story keeps returning to. As the Triassic world continued its slow recovery, the first true marine reptiles began returning to the sea their distant ancestors had once left. Ichthyosaurs, dolphin-shaped reptiles with streamlined bodies and large eyes suited to hunting in deeper, dimmer water, appeared early in this period, eventually growing into some of the most successful marine predators of the entire Mesozoic era, a lineage that would persist for well over 100 million years before finally, quietly, vanishing